Hello there, Ray here, and today I will be showing you my fast overworld hostile mob farm. This farm has over 17,000 spawning spaces and can produce an average of 135,000 items per hour, which makes this farm the fastest of its type. This farm here is a general overworld hostile mob farm. This just means that it will give you the typical mobs that spawn in overworld with this farm. So you get the zombies with the rotten flesh. You get skeletons, which give you bones as well as arrows. You get creepers, which will give you gunpowder. Witches, which are spawn a little bit more rare, but you can get the sugar, as well as redstone, as well as gunpowder, glowstone, glass bottles, spider eyes as sticks. And the farm actually produces tiny slimes as well, which will give you slime balls. But you can also make it optional where you don't have any slime spawn in the farm. And then you can also get chickens that will spawn in the farm through chicken jockeys, and this farm is designed not to kill chickens actually, so you won't get any of their drops. The farm does not produce any endermen or enderman drops, or spiders are their drops as well. The farm consists of over 17,000 modules, and each module is 1 meter wide, 3 meters long, and 31 meters tall. Up here is the spawning part of the module, and down below is the killing part of the module as well as the item transportation part. The way that this farm works is that in this farm there is no place for the mobs to spawn except for above this quartz top slab here. So once the mob spawns into this area, there is a tripwire here, and the mob will be set inside of it, and this will just cause the tripwire to get into a power state. Then this will be read by this observer block, which will give off a 2 game tick power over here right above this piston, which will allow this piston to pulse forward and pull this quartz slab over here. So you can see that it does that. It pulls it over, and then once the creeper falls out of the tripwire and the tripwire goes back into a normal state, the observer block will detect that as well. Then it will power this piston again, and this will cause the piston to drop the quartz slab back over in this area. So once the mob falls, it will fall 24 meters, and there's blocks on either side of it. And then once it comes down here, it will fall on top of this end rod here. So most mobs, when they fall 24 meters, will die instantly from the fall damage. But if it's a witch that spawns, because witches can occasionally spawn in the farm, it will come down and then get pushed into this lava over here, which it will die pretty quickly because it also took fall damage plus it took fire damage. And it doesn't have enough time to drink a fire potion or a regenerate or a health potion. So the way that this works is that all the mobs will also fall through this tripwire here, and the tripwire is being detected by this observer block. Now the observer block itself will change states once it's being detected. So if you see, this observer block turns from false to true. Now the observer block changing states can actually be detected by another observer block. So this observer block is detecting this observer blocker up here, and then this observer block is putting power right here, which is powering this piston. So then after the mob hits this end rod right here, you can see that right afterwards the mob is pushed over into lava. So if it's a witch or if it's any mob that has armor and survives the fall damage, then it'll be put in lava, and this will allow it to be killed off. Now if the mob happen to fall and happen to get past the lava as well as the fall damage, now occasionally two mobs will bump each other and they'll get able to get through this. Or if it's a chicken jockey, where a chicken jockey will fall down slow enough, the chicken itself will be able to fall down here, and that's what this magma block is here for. So any mob that falls down here will be able to get pushed by the water stream over against this magma block, and this will eventually kill the mob unless it's a witch. If it's a witch, then the witch will just take a fire resistant potion, and the witch will not actually die from the magma block. And chickens, they'll just float on top of the water, but chickens don't actually count towards the mob cap, and they will also despawn if the player is greater than 32 meters away. Now you would think that the witches that do come down here and take their fire resistant potion would actually despawn over time, just as the chickens do, as long as they are greater than 32 meters away from the player. But there is currently a bug in the game where witches that are taking potions constantly do not actually despawn, and I will put a link to the bug report in the description if you want to upvote it, because this is obviously not an intended feature. Even though this bug is in the game, it doesn't really affect the farm, because there are so many different spots for the mobs to spawn. Not very often do you get mobs spawning right beside each other where they're pushing each other, so you don't really get them actually falling down here too often. And witches are even more rare at spawning, so you don't really have too many witches in here. I think I did a 24-hour test and only had one witch in the entire farm that was stuck. So once the mobs fall and die, their loot will be dropped by the mob down below, and the loot will fall down to this water stream here. Now this piston does pulse twice, so if there is any loot that lands on top of this end rod itself, it will get pushed off, and most of the loot will fall down into the water stream. Now there is a rare chance that the loot will actually fall off to the side and land on the end rod right beside this one, and even though you would think that would really affect the farm, in the entire farm, out of like thousands and thousands of items, you might only have like 3 items in the entire farm that are stuck on top of there. So having that does not actually affect the outcome of this farm very much. Now once the items come into this water stream, they get pushed over into a second water stream. So they actually get pushed underneath of this top slab here, and then there's another water stream over here which will carry the items over to your collection area, wherever that is at. I don't often design general mob farms just because I don't find them that challenging. But with this mob farm, it actually was kind of a challenge because with every snapshot they were changing the way observer blocks worked, or else they were changing the way piston warping or other block warping worked. So here, this is one of my first designs where you just have it so the mobs spawn on top of the pistons and get pulled through, and the observer blocks were instant, so it was extremely fast. And I was testing with pistons also warping items through into water streams, which allows you to be able to collect items off of a very low area. So this is actually Y level 0 down there. And I went through several different designs. And here's a piston warping where you pull the witches over into a lava which is behind it. And different observer setups. Some are more leggier, some have some flaws and stuff. And eventually I came up with some different water techniques to move items around. And then once they removed piston warping, I also came up with a accelerated piston warping. This one accelerated the mobs through the pistons, which allowed them to actually die faster, which is really effective. And then when they removed that, I came up with a kind of T flip-flop where the pistons would drop the spawning block back and forth. That's kind of the same one I'm using there, but these are facing each other. And then it would come down, and then I had the mobs being pulled over by fence gates. The fence gates would stick out and pull the mobs over into the lava, and then that was removed. And then I eventually went with the one I have now, but you can see I went through a lot of different prototypes before I actually came up with this one, just because the snapshots kept changing and I had to keep changing up how it worked. The farm itself is massive. You can see it here. It's sitting inside of a perimeter, and the farm is sitting within a 16 by 16 chunk area. The farm itself is actually just underneath of the circular area, and for simplicity reasons I just made it into a square, that way everything would line up. But there is over 17,000 spawning spaces, and this allows me to get an average of over 135,000 items per hour. To maximize the area which the mobs can spawn around the player, we have the player AFKing in the center of the farm, so the AFK point for the player is right down here, and this point is directly between the two most important points for the mob, which is the point where the mob spawns, which is above these quartz slabs here, and then the point where the mob actually dies, which is down at these end rods down here. Because the player is AFKing in the center, the sphere is more like a cylinder at this distance. So here I cut a sphere that's about 24 meters tall, so the distance in which a mob would normally fall. And because the sphere is cut where the player is mostly in the center, it's less like a sphere and more like a cylinder, so that you can see that if a mob would spawn on the outside here, he would have the ability to fall down without falling outside of the sphere, and therefore he wouldn't despawn. With the player AFKing in the center, no mobs can spawn within 24 meters of the player, so that means some of the spawning spaces around here are not able to spawn in mobs, and that's why I cut this area out here. But this also means that mobs cannot despawn if they come within too close to the player. So if you have any chickens that come down here, let's say about this row here, chicken jockeys, you'll have some chickens maybe get stuck in the water here, and they won't be able to despawn because they're within the player, but luckily chickens don't hold up the mob cap. What also helps with this farm to be efficient is that the entire farm is placed within the first two sub-chunks of the perimeter here. So a sub-chunk is just a section of a chunk. So a chunk is a 16 by 16 by 256 area, and then a sub-chunk is just a chunk within that chunk is a 16 by 16 by 16 area within that chunk. So down here we start chunks out at Y level 0 through 15 is chunk level 1. So this is chunk level 0 where it says chunk. And then as we move up, we will move into chunk level 1, and then as we get to the very top of this farm, it will get to be in chunk level 2 once you get above it. But the entire farm is just within chunk level 0 and 1. The way that this helps the farm out is that the game is only placing mobs in areas where there is blocks obscuring the sky axis. So if there is no blocks in the area, such as a sky, then the game's not going to try to place mobs up there, and this way it just makes it faster. But since we lower it down so that there is no blocks obscuring the sky until you get to this level here, which is chunk level 1, therefore the game will not actually try to attempt to place any mobs above this. Instead, it will just place them all within the farm here. OmegaNext made me a utility mod, and one of the features that it has is the ability where it can see the tallest block which it checks to place mobs on, and this allows me to play around with it. And here I could be able to see that any blocks that actually diffuse the light or block the light completely were blocks that the game would start checking to place mobs on, and it would check them up to the chunk border. So the way that this works is that when the chunk is down here, this is chunk 1, and we move up, get to chunk 2. Now the block that is touching chunk 2 is also checked, just in case mobs can spawn on top of that. So right here where this glass is actually still part of chunk 1, but it borders chunk 2, and therefore we cannot actually have any blocks there that block the skylight. So the first block that we can actually place is down here at this level here. You can see we are looking at the block level 30 here, and therefore that's the actual highest block that we can actually place without getting into the next chunk. So what this means is that even blocks such as slime, which have a solid top block, so that means mobs can normally spawn on top of them, but they do not diffuse any light and they do not block the sky axis. You can see that down below underneath them it still says a light level from the sky as a 15, and there is no solid blocks around them or anything that's diffusing the light. So therefore this chunk is not actually checked to see if mobs can spawn in it. So even though we have some slime here, there will be no mobs actually spawning on top of it, just because the first solid block or block that diffuses the skylight is actually down here in the chunk below. Now since my entire farm is within the first 2 sub-chunks, this means that slimes can actually spawn, because slimes can spawn from 0 all the way up to level 39, and that's where my farm's at. So slimes could actually potentially spawn in here if there were spawn chunks. And I marked out a couple of spawn chunks which are over here made out of the slimes. And if you notice the rest of the farm, it is completely bare of slime chunks, and that is because this entire farm was actually built in a perimeter sized area where there is no slime chunks within the world. And that is kind of rare. And this was actually done by the help with OmegaNext. He actually wrote me MC edit filter, which allowed me to find a perimeter sized area where there's no slimes, so you can actually have your farm run without slimes affecting it. Having an area like this that's a perimeter size without having any slimes in it is really useful when you're building mob farms like this. And so I'll put a link down in the description to the source code for the filter. It is based off of Seth Bling's banned slimes filter. And also put a link down there to OmegaNext's channel, who's the one who modified it to make it work this way. Now this farm can still operate with slime chunks within it, but the reason that we try to avoid it is just because they kind of make a mess. Because the way the farm design, I have this kind of a T flip-flop where the piston pulls the block back and then pushes it back. There's no real way to tell if all the blocks are out or all the blocks are in. And the problem with it is when slimes spawn here, there'll be tiny slimes. But once they spawn, they have a chance of automatically jumping as soon as they spawn. And this causes them to actually jump off of this platform, and therefore they can get the T flip-flopping messed up, so that maybe a block will get stuck in. Now you can see that happen here. You can see that we had some blocks that got pulled in, but they never got pushed back out again. And then I just came back and I turned this whole slime chunk into glass so that we wouldn't have any slime spawning here. But that's what will happen. Now the way that we can fix this, even with this farm being inside of a slime chunk, is with this rail, and there is another observer block above here. What we do is we will send in a bunch of stacked minecarts, and they will come underneath of these pistons, and which will cause all the pistons to extend and then retract afterwards as soon as the minecarts go through. This will cause all the blocks to be on this side. And then what we do is we send a signal through this chain of observer blocks right here that are all facing one direction, and then that power will get powered downward into these pistons down here, which will cause them to drop their blocks back off over here. And by using this, we can actually fix it. This is also a on and off switch for the farm. In case you want to turn the entire farm off, you can do this, and then you can turn it back on whenever you want. Also, what helps out my farm is that all the blocks at the foot level where the mobs are trying to be spawned at are non-solid blocks. Now this is helpful because the game can start the algorithm in a non-solid block like over here, and then later on actually place the mob over here on top of the correct spot, which is this quartz over here. Now from my testing, observer blocks are a non-solid block. They are similar to glowstone blocks as well as redstone blocks, and most non-solid blocks will not allow redstone wire to be cut when they're placed beside it, and this is similar to them. And also you can actually have them above a chest, and you can still open a chest up, and that's what these can do as well. And also what's unique about these type of blocks is that you can actually stand inside them and you'll be suffocated with them, which isn't unique to most non-solid blocks. And also you can place snow layers above them. One of the challenges I had while building this farm extremely low is to make sure to get everything within the building limits of the game. Now this means I had to actually use all the blocks within the game, including the blocks at Y level 0, which is normally bedrock. Now you can break bedrock using different bedrock breaking methods, which I will put links into the description. But another challenge was also to get it so that I was using water instead of hopper minecarts to pick up the items, since water is more lag friendly and allows me to be able to transport the items more easily and store them more easily. Now this water is not tileable. Like the majority of the farm is tileable, but the water is not. You can see it's really special here. This is because once the water gets pushed off of this ledge here and gets put down into this water stream down here, this water stream is at Y level 0, where you can actually have water stream any lower. So the water has to get reset in. The way that we do this is by having a top slab here. And then for this to be there, there would be a dead spot. If the water was tileable, it would be pushing items up on top of this top slab here, and we'd be losing items. So the water is actually coming at kind of an angle, which is pushing the items off over the edge here and get pushed to either side, so they get pushed this side. That way we can avoid them actually getting placed on top of here. Now usually farms that are this huge are extremely laggy, especially for low-end PCs like mine, but this farm is extremely lag friendly. It's just the opposite of most farms like it, and I actually got 20 TPS on average when testing this. I also tested the farm for 20 hours straight, which gave me similar results. But this farm is really extremely lag friendly just because there is hardly any redstone dust in here, and I try to avoid very laggy components. The most laggy component in this whole thing is probably just the magma blocks, which can destroy water blocks that are above them, and this can cause them to do updates. Now you can remove these magma blocks and just let the mobs despawn normally if you want to, and you can also do stuff like we can remove every other end rod and place in a glass pane, and then you get to switch that out with a stair, or you place an iron bar there. You also can switch this open fence gates here with iron bars, fences, just so that the mobs do not get just so the mobs are able to get pushed over a little bit. Now you don't have to build this farm this low down. You can build it if you want to above a deep ocean or up in the sky if you want to. This is just for ideal situations, and even here you can have the option of actually not putting in all these ice blocks down here. You can just actually need one ice block for every 9 meters, which is this one that's underneath of this top slab here. And this is one that just allows items to continually flow through. Otherwise you can just leave the rest being bedrock, but this also means that the time it takes for the items to move across the entire perimeter, since there's bedrock here, it goes quite a bit slower, and it's about 3 minutes for it to cross the entire perimeter, so you still got 2 more minutes to actually transport the items into whatever place you want to put them. So it is possible just to leave this all into bedrock. So there are a lot of different smaller things that can help you improve the rates of this farm, and a lot of them are very minuscule, and they don't hardly even add a percentage onto the total item counter. But one of those things is just the longer your game difficulty goes up, the harder the mobs get. And this means that you'll have a higher chance of mobs spawning with armor, which means the armor mobs will more likely survive the fall here. So things that can do this is your local difficulty. So local difficulty can increase mob armor, which can increase that, as well as the difficulty of your game, if it's easy versus hard. The moon phase, if it's a new moon versus a full moon, can change that. Also slime spawns as well. And then stuff like if you have any spawning spaces that are loaded by the player that mobs could spawn, even though they're outside of the radius, the mobs could be spawning out here for a little while. That's why all these are switch out to glass, so the majority of the mobs do not try to spawn out here. The way I test my farm is I have all the items come out this way, and then I have them come over here to Panda's item counter. I had to update it to 1.11. This is a really useful tool for counting items that go through. So the items just come by this armor stand, then they get counted, and so that I can see the total amount of items that you get on average for an entire hour. And I ran this for 20 hours. I also ran it for like a week, but couple different designs. But yeah, it's really useful to use this item counter. It shows the real seconds as well as the game seconds, so you can see if there's any lag acquired from the farm. Although this is currently the fastest mob farm of its type, I actually have a faster mob farm which I will be showing, but if you still want to build this mob farm, there will be a world download in the description. So if you found this interesting, show me the like. If you'd like to see more crazy farms like this, subscribe. And if you have any questions, be sure to comment. Bye!